Hey everyone, today I'm going to be talking about what happened when I published 26 iOS applications on the App Store. And without any further hesitation, let's get started. Hey everyone, today I'm going to be going over a 2023 New Year's resolution goal that I made and happened to accomplish. And really was just talking about how I developed 26 iOS apps and publish them on the App Store, and these are all SwiftUI applications, so they're compatible with iPhone, iPad, macOS, and VisionOS as well, and happen to get over 3,000 users. So I'm just here to talk about exactly what it took and what I learned throughout the process and the result of the experiment for the most part. So hopefully you folks could be able to use this information for whatever you like, and yeah, I'm just going to talk about my experience throughout it. I've made this Medium article that's on my profile, and I'm going to have this in the description, so you can feel free to look at it and then browse through the information and the links at the same time. And without any further hesitation, let's dive in. So here's the overview for what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about exactly all of these 8 components over what I learned. Then I'm going to give a whole brief summary of what I accomplished, really just talking about the realities between bootstrapping, marketing, user growth, and payment system. And then I'm going to do a final recap of everything else, what to expect from all of the 9 steps and processes. So yeah, this is just an overview for what I'm talking about. And now just going further down. So the first thing that I actually had to do in particular was go through the necessary steps of regulation. So Apple requires one to be able to actually pay a $99 developer fee to be able to actually publish on the App Store, because it's just a way of how they make a good portion of their revenue. So you can be able to, 1, publish, and then 2, be able to actually have your apps available in the App Store and keep them up in the App Store as well for any further updates and user interactions as well. This is a recurring subscription. So that way, if you have present software there is on the App Store, you're going to have to keep it up. And another thing I would also like to state as well is that Dun & Bradstreet in particular is a very unique tool, because Apple in their supply chain logistics, they take up at least 30% cut in for any revenue that already goes in for developers. And Apple actually has this very unique program called the Apple App Store Small Business Program, where if you already have all the documents, all the numbers, all the logistics already set up in place to be able to provide Apple, you then need to create a Dun & Bradstreet number, which Dun & Bradstreet is a tool used by businesses to be able to assess their financial strengths as well as creditworthiness at the same time, and is really widely used with institutional investors at the same time. And Dun & Bradstreet number can actually be obtained on their site. I have an instructional video that I made over what Dun & Bradstreet is, the whole platform, to give a walkthrough on the tool itself. But I also have a link inside of the article as well if one wants to be able to go through it, to be able to actually have their number. And then with that, you are then able to actually enhance your developer account and have it fully set up as a small business if it qualifies under $1 million in your in revenue and you're just starting off. So that way, you could actually save 15% in revenue from the App Store at the same time, and you can get all your data directly from App Store Connect as well, so you're not relying on some outdated services like Glassify, or also just other companies like at the same time that typically would try to quote-unquote simplify the whole process, but they're just adding on another percentage for the supply chain whenever you are developing on the App Store yourself, and then having that revenue already come in at the same time. So I have an instructional video to talk about Dun & Bradstreet, what the platform is, how to go through it, and then also, hang on, I'm just going to go over the profile so you can see all the apps and subscriptions that I have for out the 2 years. But yeah, overall, I have a Dun & Bradstreet video to talk about, as well as Dun & Bradstreet link. To be able to get one needs to, have your business registered within the state. Then you need to get an EIN number from the IRS, depending on exactly how a business has been formed. It could be an S Corp or an LLC, preferably for those two. And then you would be able to provide those documents to Dun & Bradstreet, and then also have a business checking account as well. Depending if you have an S Corp or an LLC as well, it could depend on exactly the whole logistics and timing of when getting a business checking account as well, because of laws and regulations. But just a few things to keep in mind. Now, in regards to in-app monetization and payments, what one typically needs to do is that there's a whole step-by-step process, and there's another regulation that really goes in when creating payments. So if I'm just select an app in particular, I could probably just click it from here. Let's go with this one. Or if I can just... I'm just clicking on here. It's going to load. Let's click on this one. This was the first app in total by myself that I published. If I were to go over to subscriptions, you would need to initially, have your app already set up saying, hey, I'm going to create this new app. Then you have to go over to subscriptions, and you are going to have to create a subscription group. Go to Pro, and then you will need to have each of these subscriptions already set up, and you will submit this, each subscription, depending on exactly what it is, to the App Store, so that way you can actually submit it at the same time while the app is being published, and that way you can have a revenue model like software as a service already set up in place. And that's just one way to be able to make money with apps at the same time. And I am going to talk about exactly the logistics in regards to the payment at the very end, but this is just an overview of exactly like monetization tactics that are present right now in terms of apps that are published on the App Store for iPhone, iPad, macOS, and VisionOS. And then yes, I also talk about the regulations, and then also an example like we talked about over here. Now, another form of monetization will be in-app monetization. Typically, whenever you see an ad for games or utilities or maybe social media, a lot of internet-based companies that rely on revenue typically have in-app monetization. And Google AdMob is considered the de facto type of in-app ad monetization, where you're selling ad space within your own ecosystem. So typically, if you were to, for instance, have a banner ad or an interstitial ad, and a user in of itself happens to look at it or clicks on the ad, you get some money as a result from that. And yeah, it's a useful platform in particular, but I end up making more money with the app subscriptions than I did at first with the in-app monetization, because you need a certain threshold to be able to actually have your revenue hit your bank account. So it's typically $100 every single month, but with subscriptions in general, you can set the price in particular. But there's a key difference between the two, is that one, net 30 payments typically operate with Google. Or any other in-app ad monetization, which means for every 30 days, they're going to check to see if you reach a certain cap. And then with said certain cap, they will then deposit the rest of the money that you have earned into your bank account that you've associated with. But then with subscriptions at the same time on the App Store, they do a net 60. So that means if you have somebody pay for a subscription in February, it's mostly going to show up in April, just because that's just the policy of how Apple runs things in their ecosystem, because you're publishing on their platform at the same time. So just a few things to keep in mind over when revenue is already coming if you're publishing software by yourself. Now, going over app architecture, because a big portion of app development really comes in, creating the app. But then there's also marketing as well. That's a really big portion of the revenue of a necessary capital to be able to market the app, because it is a commodity whenever you're selling a product that you have. But developing the app, there's a lot of information out there, but a lot of people don't even know exactly where to start. So here's an overview in particular in section 3, which is a big portion of the Medium article in particular, I talk about two different forms of model architecture. There's model view controller and then model view model, which is what I widely used in particular for my SwiftUI app development as well. So if I were to talk about it in particular for model view controller, it's considered relatively simple, and it's really supported for smaller projects. But in general, if you are going to be developing something much bigger, in particular where you have multiple users on the platform and then more people are actually being onboarded, and you, for instance, are doing a Firebase app or Azure app or AWS or MongoDB where you have users, data, and information, model view model in itself is very beneficial for that, which is why I devoted a big portion of my internet-based apps for that. And the way I organized everything was that I organized everything based on feature, and then I would have the model, and view accordingly for each of the following sections as well. So for me, that's what works for me. I organize based on feature. Like for instance, if one were to go to the main page to be able to start with, and you see a tab directly at the bottom of a given app, you would see the different sections. They're kind of like apps inside of other apps as well. I like organizing it. My development process is like, okay, so if we have this entire function that we already set up in place, or this type of interface where someone's checking a flight, or they're trying to check for a hotel. Those are technically separate apps. You could technically do that, but if you want to create one whole cohesive app where people can check in for the flights, check in for their hotels, all in one platform, for instance, you can do that. So you can have four separate apps inside of one app, and you could be able to test out different features that way. And it's it's much like creating a horizontals and one side and one vertical as well in tech terms. In general, in terms of how organizing different features and such. So yeah, in particular, model view model is when we are trying to figure out how to allocate data and then how well that data is actually be interfacing with the user. So the model in particular, that's where we have the, for instance, if we were to go over this example, it's going to be the data that is organized in particular for whenever a user in particular or whatever piece of data that we're getting, we would get that information, whether if we are doing an API call, talking about the flight and see if it's identical. And there's other key qualities and characteristics in particular, like we have the ID, we got the flight number, which could be a string, departure, and date, which will be the actual date. So it's like a relational database in of itself where you would, to a certain extent, well, I mean, it's stored on a relational database depending on what one actually wants to use, but there's other information already stored inside of a given piece of data that one is already set up in place. And these components of data would actually be stored inside of a given backend service depending on exactly how well you're actually going to be marking up the data. And then the view model is sort of that bridge function, is sort of the bridge in of itself where you're interfacing between the view, which is the interface where everything looks nice and pretty, and then the model where the data in itself is considered allocated. The view model kind of bridges both the components together, and one typically stores the functions whenever they are calling upon different means of how you're going to extract the data and how well the data is actually going to be put in the front end in particular. So you have this full stack application that's already set up in place. And then people have different preferences on data management as well. And this is very important because Apple has a really big regulation when it comes to people's data and owning that data at the same time, how well people actually have control of that data, and you have to abide by those regulations as well. Apple favors a lot of apps that can keep data locally on one system versus just relying entirely on a backend, because there is a section in particular for privacy. If I were to go back to subscriptions, for instance, there's a section that has to be filled out. If I were to go back, app privacy, right over here, one would have to actually fill out each of the components of data that is already filled out, like contact info, identifiers, usage, diagnostics, what's being collected. And that part is actually really critical, but Apple prioritizes, and there's a faster review if you have a local-based app where no data is collected. And the approval process is actually, it's a lot quicker whenever there's data that is not set collected in of itself. It's just a regulation step that reviewers typically have to go through, and developers also need to abide by at the same time, just throughout it. It could be a pain and could be very time consuming, but it's just that's what I'm mentioning about in terms of app development relying more on business and law than tech, because of the regulation that also goes in, and the supply chain logistics and how and who's making money off of the work that's actually being put in. So are different types of data storage. I talk about local, I talk about hybrid. Core data is a part of Xcode as well, where one can actually make sort of a mini relational database on the inside. If anyone saw a database icon inside of Xcode, that's core data, and one can actually have a relational database schema where one can actually have, for instance, a series of, depending on exactly how you want to structure your model in particular, one could set it up that way, or one could, for instance, use it for just offline purposes. You could understand the relationships between local data at the same time, and it's really good for state management at the same time, such as whenever somebody logs off an app or they are swiping up off an app, they're able to see in particular the same data once they come back, and it's like their state in particular has not been moved suddenly. Like, for instance, they move from one app to another, and suddenly all their data is gone. That is a problem that you need to focus on for state management at the same time. There's hybrid data storage as well, such as if somebody is totally offline for a while, but all their data is already stored on a database somewhere, like in Firebase, to give an example. and then you can have the data already synced with core data, and then you can use Firebase or MongoDB to be able to allocate the data and the relationships as well. You can do background sync tasks as well, so that way you could just update every single user's personal information or information in general that is not personal at the same time. And there's like other examples I give, talk about real life collaboration. And then also Combine. Combine is a really big library that Apple already released when it comes to data management at the same time. And Apple likes to keep everything inside of their ecosystem because Apple proprietary tech. This is what makes the business separate. So with SwiftUI, Combine is actually a really good library in terms of managing one's data, and then combining it with the core data workflow, one could be able to have a more seen-through, intuitive experience, especially the way how data is really persistent and also saved in state management use cases at the same time. Now, a big portion that I do want to talk about is when I was applying in my grad school stuff, because on my Medium page, I do have 2 articles where I talk about both my master theses I had to defend to be able to get my degree, where I talk about applications of machine learning for computer vision and anatomical segmentation for robotic surgical vision, but that's for other videos as well. And when I was applying in my computer vision background, Apple actually has this whole thing called Create ML over here, which is more like an interface in particular where if one wants to make a new document, they have this whole model zoo in particular for like for object detection, style transfer, text classification, hand post classification, but all these are just stored models. I could talk about, for instance, about custom models versus having store models, what's going to be more powerful at that point. But Apple has their own libraries depending on the application of how you want to use them. And I published a number of apps on the App Store that I had to actually put, because if one wants to put in machine learning models, in particular, you have to abide by their whole format because they have Core ML file encryption as well. So the best means to be able to do that, if you have a PyTorch model that you have made for object detection, style transfer, or instance segmentation at the same time, what you need to do is that you need to convert that PyTorch model to Onyx and then Onyx to Core ML, because Onyx is, which is spelled ONNX. It's going to actually allow one to be able to shift it inside and put it inside of Apple's own Core ML format. They already have a number of docs where they typically go over for conversion of that as of this year, so just to keep things in mind. And I already have the following apps. You can also play around and test with it, style transfer, and I do a software as a service type of thing, and then in-app monetization as well, where I took basically a sketch in of itself, and then I had the model. Well, this is all locally trained on a CPU that Apple has, and then that style in of itself could be used for following components of art. And yeah, that's just like one example of one thing I wanted to do to be able to get that New Year's resolution goal of 20 apps in 1 year. And I just thought, okay, well, why don't I just have different styles, style transfers for this various app for a local model that doesn't collect any data whatsoever. People can play around, interface with it. They like the art. So computer vision is a component of artificial intelligence. It's just because people's present conception of it involves of applying transformers and tokenization of data, large amounts of it, and then there's a bit of a dichotomy disconnect here and there when it comes to it, but that's another video to talk about. I talk about as well about creating a object classifier, the Big Cat classifier as well. So if I want to like go over here, basically what I wanted to do, my grandpa was actually he went on a safari, and he was an engineer from General Electric. And then what I did in particular was that I applied the YOLO V8 classification. I just applied the object detection, but I actually had to create my own bounding box, and then had to make a description depending on the number of fields I actually had to put in. And for object detection, I actually had to split up the data 70, I think it's 70, 10, and 20 and 10. Yeah, it was for object detection. I made my own data set that I had, and then I had to go over to CVAT, which is Intel's own platform, or it was at that time. Now you have the subscription to be able to go, and I would annotate in particular just a data set that I would have for classification of given animals. for the 5-bit cats to be able to start with. So when I was able to get something like that and apply some of my grad school stuff in terms of what knowing about computer vision and applying machine learning at the same time, making classification models and putting them, applicably in a present case where people can see them, it was like, oh wow, this is actually pretty cool. So I had to make my data set first, and then afterwards I had to make my own bounding box in another section at the same time. If it's right over here, hopefully this is the one. Yep, this is the one. Nope. I had this one already set up. This was another iteration that I had. There we go. Yeah, so I had the bounding box. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, so I had to make my own bounding box along with the object label at the same time. It would actually, yeah, so I would have that right there, and then depending on exactly the image, the model will actually pick up and make a series of classifications depending on exactly, hey, this is a lion, this is a jaguar, this is a leopard, this is a cheetah, and this was something that's already there. It's free. I think I have an ad on it, but it's just like a banner ad. That's just pretty much it. But yeah, I had to make my own bounding box for it, and here's a model classifier as well. As you can see, it's all in their core ML model that's already set up in place. I put in the different labels that I set up in place, and this is a convolution neural network. Here are the different types of convolution batches, the type of activation function used, just really the architecture underneath that would actually go inside of the core ML model at the same time, and as well as any of the activation functions, and then optimization algorithm at the same time, which was yeah, over here. So yeah, that's just one example. So it was just a way to apply my computer vision background just to be able to get to New Year's resolution goal. So if I were to like, let me just go back for a second. I'm just gonna go back to the yeah, there we go. Okay, anyway, so I talk about the YOLO V8 over exactly like Apple's own core ML formatter model, and then we have the raw output, and then have my own labels at the same time. And then I talk about exactly what other backends one could be able to use in the entire thing. One can use Firebase, Azure, MongoDB, via Realm, and the backend as a service, especially for example for Firebase. Firebase has, for instance, their own sign-in providers at the same time that one can be able to use to create, such as with Apple, Google. Another thing too, if you're using a sign-in provider and you're using Google and Facebook, you need to have Apple in there. It's just a requirement that they have for the most part. And I have a video as an example. Like I made an LSAT app for my girlfriend. Just to talk about, so this is just like an unlisted video, just giving an example what it looks like, and I personally like it. This video overlay was something that actually made sense to me to be able to create. I have custom pages with that. That's probably for another video, but after I went through the whole app development process, I had to make sure, one, it obviously looked good. It was something that I thought, wow, this actually looks really good. The whole interface behind it, I would use it, I would practice with it, etc. But yeah, that's just one example to be able to go through and such. And user walkthrough at the same time, the side menu that is already set up in place. And another thing too, if one has an account, in particular like with Apple, Google and such, one needs to have a delete and logout account, logout buttons obviously, so that way people can have full control of their data. It's just what the reviewers typically go through on it. It's just the reality behind it, and this is just a side menu I typically would use throughout the rest of the apps I would make, just to get the quantity and number. And well, yeah, one we need to actually go through publishing the app and understand exactly what's going to be compliant, what's going to be complacent. As stated before, when I went over here, you're going to need to list out the privacy as well as what data is also collected. You're going to need to add a description. If I were to go back to the example for this app, yeah, here we go. So one, we need a promotional text, description, what's new about the version. You're going to need to create a website at the same time. So if I were to, for instance, go to this one over here, yeah, you're going to need to go through that. So if I had something like this, hey, this is the app, this is what we talk about. You're going to need a terms of service and a privacy policy. So if you open up, you open this one as well. yeah, you're gonna need this so that way Apple can actually approve of this in terms of service at the same time. That's able to go through. You will need to create your website just for the app and for the App Store in general, so people can have access to the user information. It's very easy to be able to create, especially whenever you have like a given image that you have at the same time. If you want to, yeah, here we go. Yeah, if you put it up that way, yeah, here we go. So it's all compatible for mobile and desktop at the same time. So yeah, that's just one example and also a thing to keep in mind. And you're gonna have to wait on a number of reviews as well. You could speed up the process with it. I do talk about like, here's the Apple developer, and then this part in itself, one could actually put a file claim in particular to be able to speed up the app depending on like, hey, do you need this for a given launch party or something like that. So yeah, that's just an example to be able to give for the most part whenever publishing. Just keep it in mind of like reviews, how long it will take. Make sure you test for crashes and create your own unit tests as well. I give an example of exactly like, hey, given unit tests that you would have, just making sure the app doesn't crash. But if you already tested it out enough, but also make sure you go through each of the following heuristics over what to make, you should be fine. But again, always write your tests and always make sure that you actually know exactly like how well each of the following steps and different possibilities or what would happen. So I give that example down here. And then also organic user growth. Now, if you are doing this, if you are publishing on the App Store by yourself with no venture capital, no outside funding, and you're doing this solely by yourself, I already mentioned about the costs that are going to require. Make sure as well you have a good MacBook at the same time, because Xcode and everything else, it's going to make things so much easier to be able to publish on the App Store. You're in Apple's ecosystem. It's their whole platform, so it'll be a lot easier for everyone to be able to do that. Just make sure that you have enough RAM to be able to actually cover the number of apps at the same time, because Xcode does have a lot of caches that are already built up because of the number of simulations that one would be able to do, such as, for instance, if one is going to be simulating, like as mentioned before here, in your one Tesla login screen and such. Like there's a lot of caches for the simulators that Apple downloads in Xcode, so just a few things to keep in mind. And then also with organic user growth, just another thing in terms of experimentation, social media is not reliable in regards to app downloads. In particular, the best means to be able to do it in particular is going to be via an Apple's ecosystem. So there's Apple Ads in particular and Apple Search Ads. So with Apple Search Ads, it's just another means of how they actually make money and revenue and such, where if you pay a certain amount of time that the app is actually going to be on the App Store, and you want to get a certain amount of users to download, they would actually download on said App Store, and they were advertised in particular about like, hey, this is going to be at the top of the list because of XYZ. And they have an advanced and basic. So this would be the basic, for instance, and then this would be the advanced. You can interface with it to be able to go through on it, so that way you know exactly like, hey, if I have a given app and it's attached with my developer account, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to pay, so that way you can go out there. Just be sure to keep in mind and just watch out for the costs whenever they have X amount of users actually download your app as well. But also another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of search engines rely on key value search pairs. So if one has a piece of content, or one has, for instance, a product or a commodity that they are selling on the internet in particular, and a search engine needs to cipher throughout all that means of data. If you have a title for a given app that isn't as, that's something that people would think of and search through in particular, for instance, like how to ride a bike, or how to develop an app, for instance, and your video or something else comes up as the first video, that is a really good sign for, aside from traffic and such. But another thing too, if your title is exactly word for word and character by character over what people are going to search, chances are that piece of commodity content or app or anything that is already on the that you publish on the internet, it's going to be listed as the first item, because that key value search pair inside of the search engines for every single piece of character that our user types in, it's going to have an exact 100% match because they typed in exactly what they're looking for. And as a result, for them looking and they find the first thing that comes up is your content, then it's 100% match. And chances are, because it's already in the first piece of information that they've seen, they're probably going to click on it. So it's just a few things to keep in mind, especially when you're developing this organically. As mentioning about the key value search pair throughout any internet-based commodity, for instance, that one is publishing at the same time. And yeah, the realities when it comes to bootstrapping, marketing, user growth, payment. One, don't be surprised about multiple reviews, because chances are, if this is your first time publishing an app, like the direct first time, you're going to have to go back again, because the first time an app is actually pushed for review, there's a high chance that it's not going to be accepted at first, and there's probably because it's just a reviewer's job to be able to make sure that the app is good for Apple's ecosystem, and we're bonded by regulations and such. Excuse me. And so don't be surprised about multiple reviews when publishing a single app, because it is a process, but make sure that it's already checked out. But after that first initial review, there is that skyrocket, as mentioned before. So let me just go off for a second. So there's this, for instance, I had this initial growth when I made my document scanner. That was pretty big. And then everything else kind of stagnated as well, because it's so much easier to be able to publish more apps as well once one actually publishes the first time, and then everything else and every single update becomes easier and more greenlit as well. And you have to respect the reviewer, respect the reviewer's review, because it's just like, hey, this is the app in terms of like publishing, like what's out there. Be sure to reiterate, go back and communicate to them in particular about, hey, this is the app, this is what's going to happen if we do this and that, and make sure you clear up everything in terms of how well the app is supposed to work, what are the logistics, what data is collected, and just abide by the reviews and just do everything in a timely manner, and obviously with respect, throughout the whole thing. And then be aware for said reviews as well, there would be some time delays, but again, as mentioned before, if you are need an expedited review, you can request one within the Apple Developer Portal, not through App Store Connect, but Apple Developers platform. You can actually request for a developer review, so that way you could be able to actually get the app sooner. I'll just go back really quick. And yeah, just be sure to respect the reviews over what to expect for the most part. Yeah, here we go. And so yeah, overall, here is a recap of everything that already just came into play. So as mentioned before, for each of the 9 following steps, prepare for regulation, know how to develop an app, and develop in-app monetization. Be aware of exactly the net 30-day, net 60-day, and then also know exactly different means of how to integrate in-app monetization for fluidity and fit the user experience at the same time. Know exactly the different types of app model architecture as well. And then also keep in mind about how organic user growth would actually be set up in place. Don't expect a lot of growth to be able to start with unless you got a lot of money for marketing, because if you can do that, then Apple will be able to push it, and then chances are more people are going to be downloading your app. So in terms of capital allocation, that is where the majority of the capital will actually be used. It will be used for marketing the commodity, because if you already developed the app that is already on the App Store and already have a certain amount of users, you want to blow it up. In particular, the direction where the capital will actually be going is going to be focusing on the marketing already set up in place. So yeah, hang on, I was just trying to get the lifetime over here. Yeah, I was just kind of slow for a second. But yeah, overall, so yeah, and also just keep in mind about that software in reality is a commodity to be able to start with, and then as a result from said commodity, that it's going to be treated as such, and it takes a lot of effort to be able to develop it, but there is a strong sense of craftsmanship that already goes in, and especially a sense of accomplishment when you're publishing a large amount of software and already having organic users at the same time. There is some peace and equanimity throughout the rest of the process for it, and it can be pretty zen at the same time, especially when developing large amounts of software and then seeing the applicability that really goes in. Yeah, it's kind of peaceful at the same time, and there's a good sense of accomplishment whenever there's something challenging already set up in place and then you finally accomplish it. There's a really good resounding empowering feeling with it, and yeah. in particular. So yeah, this was the rest of the article in particular. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. If you found this video helpful, be sure to feel free to please like and subscribe. And if you have any other questions as well, please put them inside of the comment section, and I will be happy to answer them at the same time. And just trying to make sure like this is all good for the most part. And so, yeah, thank you all very much for taking time to watch this. If you found this video helpful, be sure to feel free to please like and subscribe. And if you have any other questions as well, please put them in the comment section. I'll be happy to answer them at the same time. And very best of luck to you. Hope this video was helpful. Cheers. Bye-bye.